Technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us. It is our Friday weekend edition, and certainly we welcome your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter with me today, and we are going to start off by talking about the attack there in Barcelona. It did happen yesterday. We didn't really spend time talking about it. I wanted to really focus on a little bit more today. We know a lot more today, and our first article is about that. We will then revisit the conversation we've had this week about Charlottesville and the taking down of monuments and flags and other issues. And if you'd like to join us, we'll certainly welcome your phone calls. It'll be the first time we've had a chance to hear from Penna Dexter's commentary on that. And her commentary, by the way, today is called The Success Sequence. We're going to talk a little bit later about poverty and the various keys to not going into poverty. So again, those are just a few of the articles we've posted on the website. And Penna Dexter, always great to have you in studio.
Kerby, you mentioned that you put a piece up at pointofview.net about the Barcelona terror attack. And I recommend it. It's from the Telegraph, and not necessarily as much for the copy, because that keeps getting updated throughout the day with news, but the pictures, just the photographs of what happened. When I was looking at those, it makes it so real to see, how this affects various citizens and people's reactions, and what sort of the damage is. And I mean, it just sometimes seems like we get these clusters of times when events that are catastrophic and bad move so fast. And that was certainly the case with this, because we had, I know that you were talking about the Charlottesville protests and things earlier in the week, and then all of a sudden we have this to focus on. It was really a van that crashed into a crowd in Spain, in Barcelona, killing, about 13 people, injuring more than 100 people, and the area was packed with tourists. Spain has been a place where, I think it was back in 2004, where there was multiple casualties in a subway terrorist attack, and they have been pretty good about shoring up for terror, and there hasn't been a big mass terror attack since. But now the new method, and ISIS did claim credit for this, is the new method has to do with soft targets, tourists, and these big areas where people are unprotected, and there was no barricades on this street. I mean, you wouldn't expect it. It's beautiful. And then now everything is going to have to be ugly, because we're going to have to be putting up barricades in tourist areas everywhere across Europe, I'm afraid.
One of the people that normally joins us on Friday, and he's out traveling today, is Kelly Shackelford. And just a few weeks ago, he was in Barcelona. Yeah. So wouldn't you have loved to hear his comments about this particular situation? But as you point out, this is a terrorist action that is now becoming much easier for the terrorist and harder to prevent. If you're trying to put together a bomb or a sequence of events that all have to be very effectively coordinated, there's a chance for those counterterrorism units to catch that. But when all you have to do is get in a van, get in a truck, get in a bus, get in a car, whatever, plow down the street, this is something that is easier for the terrorist and harder for the counter-terrorist to prevent, killing more than a dozen people, injuring more than 100. As you said, ISIS claimed responsibility. And it just illustrates, again, kind of the change of tactics that's coming from the Islamic State right now. There probably will be some that will do more damage in the future if we do not prevent them. But those, in many cases, are easier to interrupt because you need multiple actors, you need munitions, you need all sorts of things. In this particular case, this is really hard to deal with. We talked with some counterterrorism people that said maybe you could close off a street here or there, but it just is going to be difficult. In Europe, with the fact that they have an open society, isn't this, I think, the 30th terrorist attack in Europe in the last couple of years? And so sad to say this is not the last that we'll probably hear or be reporting about here on Point of View.
I saw one chart about terror attacks in the Wall Street Journal, and so many of them were in Paris.
Yes.
And, so people even interviewed in Barcelona yesterday said, well, we avoided Paris for our vacation. You know, we thought we'd be better off going somewhere besides that. And then here this happens in Barcelona. I do know that earlier this year, there were warnings about tourist sites being attacked. And then 2 months ago, there was actually a warning about Barcelona. But, you know, there are a lot of those types of alerts that come up, and the CIA, I guess, had warned of this. But, you know, you don't know exactly what it's going to be or where it's going to be. And we didn't mention that there was also 70 miles away from Barcelona, a coastal town, Cambrils, I believe. And there was also an attack there. And then another town, there was 2 explosions at a house, which may be related. There were explosives actually being put together and made there, and this was an accidental explosion. So, you know, things are a little bit crazy there in that Barcelona area.
Well, again, so far, 4 terror suspects have been killed in that second attack. And so, again, you have to just recognize there's not too much you can do to prevent this. And, of course, the other question that's going to surface is when we bring so many individuals in here who can be radicalized. Either they came from another country or in some cases they're homegrown, but they can be radicalized into this Islamic radicalism. That's another real issue that needs to be addressed. So you address the first one, and that is tourism. Because of terrorism is being affected, there are a lot of people that say, you know, I'm not sure I want to go to Europe right now. Don't want to go to Paris. Now I'm not sure I want to go to Barcelona. Don't want to go to the Istanbul airport. After I was there about a month later, that's where you had an attack there. You start eliminating all the places you don't want to go. That's the first issue. But then second of all, what are those countries going to do to actually prevent this from happening in the future in terms of not just having counterterrorism or police, but just trying to address the radical ideology that's created it in the first place?
I know. You know, a couple of times I've been to Israel and my kids have said, oh, you know, we worry about you going.
Yes.
And it's probably one of the safer places because they do know about security, and especially with regard to tourists, because tourism is so big. But, you know, you just wonder if some of the apparatus that is there that sort of holds sway in Israel will have to be implemented now in European countries. It's just sad, though. It's very sad. It's not an army that we can fight with an army. We have to fight it in different ways, and it's very difficult.
Well, again, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into some of the events that have unfolded over the last week. But again, the first article there about the attack in Barcelona, there's a lot more we can talk about, and if you'd like to join our conversation on that, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. But again, we can at least report, even with those who were killed and injured, they were able to at least shoot dead 4 terror suspects in the second event. And, of course, there are probably all sorts of other manhunts going on in that regard as well. When we come back, though, I do want to address a couple of issues, and that is in light of the protests last week, we know a little bit more. We've posted a couple of articles, one in particular that I might point you to. We can reject both extremes. The president got in trouble. I don't agree with it, but was criticized, I should say, for simply saying that there were bad actors on both sides. I think that is the case. We talked about earlier in the week the fact that indeed with some of those individuals like Antifa, they weren't really covered very well by the press. So we'll talk about that as well. And whether or not we need to start taking down more monuments. Everybody today is talking about Six Flags. Six Flags has 6 different flags. One of those is a Confederate flag. So they decided, well, to take down the Confederate flag, the Mexican flag, the Republic of Texas. So we're going to have to start calling Six Flags one flag now because it's just, I guess, too controversial to even have a Confederate flag at Six Flags. That's the title of the amusement park. The insanity continues. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Jean Twenge has been researching generational differences for a quarter century, but she noticed in 2012 abrupt shifts in teen behaviors and emotional states. Up until that time, there were gentle slopes on the line graphs. Suddenly, they became steep mountains and sheer cliffs. That is the year when the proportion of Americans who owned a smartphone surpassed 50%. Her latest article in The Atlantic asked this ominous question: have smartphones destroyed a generation? The generation she is thinking about would be the trailing edge generation of the millennials, born between 1995 and 2012. She calls them iGen because the smartphone and social media have shaped their lives. Psychologically, they are more emotionally vulnerable than the leading-edge millennials. She says rates of teen depression and suicide have skyrocketed since 2011. It's not an exaggeration to describe iGen as being on the brink of the worst mental health crisis in decades. Much of this deterioration can be traced to their phones. A national survey of seniors found that teens who spend more time on average on screen activities are more likely to be unhappy, and those who spend more time on average on non-screen activities are more likely to be happy. Jean Twenge says there's not a single exception. She says the advice she would give to a teenager based on the survey is put down the phone, turn off the laptop, and do anything that does not involve a screen. Of course, we don't have to look at these dismal statistics and just lament. Her article and research should be a call to action for parents and grandparents. They are the ones buying these devices, so they need to reevaluate the potential dangers to their children and grandchildren. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Sony Pictures, All Saints, the inspiring story of Pastor Michael Spurlock with John Corbett. In theaters August 25th, rated PG, allsaintsmovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter in studio with us today, and we wanted to talk a little bit about the tension and the tragic events in Charlottesville, Virginia. Of course, that took place last week. We just had the funeral, provided, if you will, a flashpoint for the nation and a national discussion about discrimination. But this is the first we've had a chance to hear some of your comments, Penna, so I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I know that you've talked about this at length and other days on the show, but I just look at it. Of course, we have to rightly condemn white supremacist, alt-right type people who have a violent intent and that sort of thing. But they are really, if you look at them as a threat, they are a very small number of people compared to the leftist mobs that we've been seeing on college campuses and other venues across the country. So it's a pitched battle between, in a sense, two organized mobs. There's the white nationalist groups, and then there's the badly underreported Antifa and anti-fascist groups on the left. And so, yes, it was going to be a protest against a monument, and then it was sort of stopped. So you didn't get to hear, as Ann Coulter mentioned, you didn't get to hear the points made or the speakers that were made. It just turned into a brawl. Mm-hmm. And so in a sense, I think, first of all, the police should have been more ready for the violence there. But also, I think that they should have allowed the original event to go on as planned. I think it might have been peaceful, but that's not what happened. And of course, Donald Trump can never do anything right. And I don't really understand why he went beyond his statement condemning the groups that are white supremacists, that are all right. I don't know why he went beyond. I think he had done both, but I think he had to clarify for his support base that really this was an equal opportunity at fault event. And so the man can, move forward again after another week of really a difficult week for him. It's been a very difficult week for him. And I think that's a lot of this. A lot of this has to do with people who are in opposition to the government we have.
One of the arguments against the president was that he said there was violence on both sides. And a lot of people say, well, what does he mean by that? That's why we posted as our second article today a piece by Austin Peterson. Andrew is the one that pointed it out. You can reject Antifa, or Antifa, which way you want to say it, for the anti-fascist commies and the alt-right Nazis, because he points out, of course, that the activists on the anti-fascist side, something we've talked about, interestingly enough, with Dinesh D'Souza before this. That was kind of a lead-in to this.
Isn't that interesting? You just had Dinesh D'Souza on, and he talks about the leftist roots of Nazism.
And certainly that. And then on the second page, he goes on and says, what about the alt-right? Is it entirely fascist? He says no, but some parts of it are. Some of these people are sincere conservatives whose gripes with establishment politics not serving the interests of the working people are legitimate. Some of them are capitalists with ties to libertarian traditions who have warped the philosophy with their views on creating an ethno-state, an idea that flies in the face of peaceful volunteerism. Still others are just bored teenagers who flock to whatever the biggest fad in politics are. And then he says, and finally, some are sincere national socialists. And they go, wait a minute, they're not socialist. Well, that's, of course, what Dinesh D'Souza pointed out, that in some respects they are very much socialist. Matter of fact, he even points out they were waving flags because they believe in universal health care. Now, they believe in it because they want to make sure that there's health care for white babies, but not for black babies. But nevertheless, you've got to really begin to understand that what the president said maybe wasn't said as articulately as some of us would like. But I thought this very seminal piece by Austin Peterson is a good summary of who the groups are and the fact that there aren't necessarily one monolithic group. Some of those guys with their tiki torches may not have been white supremacists, may not have been neo-Nazis. They were just there. Others believe in a very large state. And, of course, even in the activists that fought against him, some of them are part of Antifa and some of them are not. So there's a lot more ambiguity. And it's interesting that at Fox News the other day, somebody went back and looked and realized when some of these conflicts have happened in the past, we've never asked the president to speak to that. We didn't ask whether it was George Walker Bush or Barack Obama to speak on this, but they demanded that Donald Trump, and part of that is because, well, we know you're a white supremacist, so you've got to come out there and once again, if you hadn't done it all during the campaign, disavow all these various groups. And because he didn't disavow it the way they wanted to hear it, of course, there's where the controversy.
He probably could never have done that.
Yeah.
But the organizer of it, the Unite the Right guy, Jason Kessler, they looked back last week and found he was an Obama supporter, paid member of Occupy Wall Street.
There you go.
And so, you have that person organizing it. And so, there has to be some motivation to get at Trump. But also, I think just normal people who don't like to see monuments torn down probably showed up too.
I would think so. I might just mention that Ben Shapiro's piece we posted yesterday, the group that got ignored in Charlottesville, I sort of this week spent a little bit of time explaining what the alt-right was because we had some people call in and tried to cover that and who's Richard Spencer and, of course, David Duke and people like that. I didn't feel the need to really spend as much time talking about Antifa because Dinesh D'Souza did it, but these two articles, Ben Shapiro's article yesterday, Austin Peterson's today, I think would be helpful because this is a group that's going to show up again. And frankly, I think it is better funded and is going to be more ubiquitous because they show up, maybe not the same individuals, but people with that ilk at every World Trade Organization event, and they cause controversy. They were some of the same kinds of people at Berkeley when you had Milo Yiannopoulos and then, of course, later Ann Coulter. So this is a group you're going to have to know about. And
they're not a group that's super organized, really. I mean, there are a lot of them all over. Actually, it's a worldwide sort of movement. And I think a lot of the funding is George Soros funding.
I think so.
But they're hyper-violent. So, they are violent. You can just see even how they're dressed in some of the pictures from Charlottesville. They're communists often, anarchists. They say they're opposed to racism, sexism, homophobia, and capitalism. So it just spans the broad brush left. And so, as you said, they were at Berkeley, and they basically try to shut down some of these speakers. And one description of them was radical pan-leftist politics of social revolution is kind of what's behind them. So, and they fight the far right. They adhere. They have communists, they have socialists, and they have anarchists in their numbers. And they're committed to halting white supremacy. There are groups around the world, and they treat small fascist or Nazi groups very seriously. They take them seriously, and that's why they show up at these things.
Let's take some phone calls then, and we'll go first to a DJ in North Carolina, WLGT. DJ, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks for taking my call. I have a question for you. I just read online today, and I don't know the truth of it, if there's any truth behind it, but the mayor of Charlottesville had told the police department to back off and not do anything. That this had been planned since May, and bring the two groups together and just let them go at each other. You know anything about that? Or
I've heard people say that, and, you know, I would like to have something that's got a little better verification, you know, that would do that. But the reality is the police did back off. They're talking about having some kind of event here, even in Dallas, not far from where we're broadcasting. They're talking about the fact that the police, if that happens, will make sure that those two groups do not get anywhere near each other. So whether that was intended, which I've heard some people argue, or accidental, that's why you have the conflict that you had.
I will mention that we posted something by Jim Talent on pointofview.net. It was from National Review, End the Violence. And he says in this piece that the mayors in a lot of these incidences that we've seen, Black Lives Matter protests and things like that, have been way too lenient. They've been way too lenient. They don't want to, they're political to the core, and they don't want to offend a certain constituency, but that it's really it's not up to the federal government, it's up to the states to have a policy and to equip their cities to be ready for this type of thing now.
Let me just mention that when we come back from the break, Penna, let's work our way through this, because this is by former senator from Missouri, Jim Talent. We've known him for many years. He now is a fellow with the Bipartisan Policy Center, and it's a very good 3-page piece on end the violence. Those who break the law protest should do jail time. And this is something, first of all, that I would encourage you to read, but I would also encourage you, if you have any kind of connection with a member of the city council, the sheriff's department, the police department, the mayor's office, to pass it on to them, because he's got a number of very concrete policy recommendations so that the kind of conflict and the tragic events that took place in Charlottesville will not happen again. So we're going to come back and talk about that. We also have a number of phone calls, so let me give a chance for those of you to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll talk about this piece by Jim Talent, Penna Dexter with me, and then we'll take some more phone calls. We'll be back right after this.
From Affirm Films and Provident Films, who brought you War Room, comes All Saints. New pastor Michael Spurlock, his struggling congregation, and a group of refugees come together, trusting God as they plant seeds for a future that might just save them all.
Start a farm, we work together, we save the church.
All Saints, starring John Corbett, in theaters August 25th, rated PG, parental guidance suggested. More information is available at allsaintsmovie.com.
Point of View Radio wants to fuel change in our culture, but we need your help to do it. And I use the word need very intentionally. I worked with a well-known radio ministry for 29 years, a program that helped a lot of people. They got saved, they got elected to Congress, it produced a lot of good. But people started thinking that someone else would give, and that program isn't here anymore. Your gift today can make sure that doesn't happen to Point of View. Visit pointofview.net and click the banner Change Happens With You, or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net at 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Almost all the lines are full, and a minute ago they were all full. So if you get a busy signal, just wait, and you can call back, and we will give you that opportunity. Penna Dexter with me. It is our weekend edition, and I started off by talking a little bit about how Six Flags will be one flag because they took down the Confederate flag, and they can make that decision. The other day we mentioned Stone Mountain, and that is of interest because you have one individual running for the governorship who is suggesting that it's time to just sandblast Stone Mountain. Now, you've seen it. I have been to Georgia many times. I've never been there. In light of this, I need to get over there real quickly to see it before it gets sandblasted down, if indeed that's what takes place. Tell us more what you found out.
Well, I have seen it many times because my in-laws, my husband's parents, migrated from Long Island, New York, and my father-in-law became working in the superintendent of schools office in that area of Georgia. They lived in Stone Mountain. And when I was a young wife and young mom, we would go to visit them in the summers, and we would go to Stone Mountain, and they had light shows. You'd bring a picnic, and you'd get a light show with music, and they're playing Dixie, and historical commentary. And it was really an event. And even, this is sad for me, but the night that my father-in-law died, we had actually had a family event there. We'd all enjoyed each other, and then he died that night, but of a heart attack. But so when I look at the pictures of the monument, and the one, Stacey Abrams is running for governor as a Democrat. She's running to be nominated on the Democrat ticket and then to run for governor. And she says that the carving that depicts three Confederate war leaders, which is Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, and Stonewall Jackson, should be taken off. If anyone's been there, it would be a monumental task. It would leave it, and it wouldn't leave much, there. Wow. And I know that, of course, all these events that I just described will not be happening anymore. These are just. I think what's going to happen and what is happening is an effort to erase a big part of our history. We may not like it, but it's real. It's part of our history, the Civil War, the Confederacy, and all of that. And so, we won't even be able to learn the lessons from that if we erase all trappings of it. But I have a feeling that's what will end up happening.
Wow. We mentioned, of course, when you go to Washington, D.C., you have lots of statues. And, of course, we mentioned the other day, Al Sharpton said we should get rid of the Jefferson Memorial, or at least make it no longer a national park, or whatever he suggested. Didn't Nancy Pelosi suggest that they get rid of all the statues of Confederate individuals that are in the United States Capitol?
Yeah, and, if you go to the Capitol, which you've done, I know, many times, and I have, and you can see statues that are contributed by the states.
Right.
This was the area where Congress used to meet, and then when they added to the buildings and have other chambers, now this is sort of an area for statues, and it's so interesting. And of course, some of the states have statues of people, famous Confederate figures, and she's, they shouldn't be there, according to Nancy Pelosi. Actually, the Congress would have to pass a law in order to do this, but she said, well, Paul Ryan, you're Speaker of the House, you can make sure that's passed.
Well, again, what are your thoughts about this? We certainly have opportunity here to have a national discussion here on Point of View, and so we wanted to give you that opportunity. Also, of course, we talked a little bit about what happened in Barcelona, so let me take that call real quickly before we get some of the ones related to the statutes in Charlottesville. So we'll go to South Carolina. James, what would you like to add as we talk about this issue of terrorism?
Yes, hello. It has to do with the designation of terrorism or being radicalized. And I think it would be so much more accurate to designate them as cowards. I don't know why there's not, more of a focus on just the cowardice of, sneaking up behind women and children and killing them, driving a car into a crowd or blowing up bombs. It's a straight coward.
Yes.
And I think it just doesn't give justice to say a radical terrorist because, it's a radical coward.
Yes. Well, again, let's give credit where credit's due. Both President Barack Obama and even before that, President George W. Bush referred to them as cowards. So I think that's one of the things we need to do. So
well, I mean, you're right, because it's the exact opposite of the bravery with which we can praise those in the military that fight for our, American causes. Because it does seem very cowardly to go into a group of civilians out there, tourists, trying to have a vacation and just plow them down.
Let's take some more phone calls, and we're going to give as many of you an opportunity to join the conversation. As a caller drops off, that will give you an opportunity to join us, and we'll get to those calls as quickly as we can. Let's go to Georgia this time. Lisa, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
Yes, thank you. I've enjoyed listening to Point of View for many years, and I really appreciate the common sense logic that you guys promote. Again, our world is in a lot of chaos and a lot of messed up people, and as a Christian, I feel like I'm just always in prayer for our leadership and, the decisions they have to make. And in regards to all this protest and the decisions to remove this and that, I have been to Stone Mountain. It was a beautiful experience, and our history is never going to be perfect. It never will be perfect, and people are going to protest on a lot of different causes, but to remove our monumental historian statues, it's just a lot. It doesn't make sense. It just is crazy, and I don't understand how we can just sit by and not stand up for those rights that, as Christians, we're those people that promote our values, in the music industry, in the TV and movies. I mean, I would like to see more of us standing up for, the causes that are true. And the thing is, I would like to be able to help in any way, because I just don't feel like our voices are being heard. People are scared to even say that who they voted for nowadays. It's just crazy.
I sense your frustration. It seems that as the years pass, the Christian consensus certainly has eroded, and you come to a point where you don't feel like you really have a voice. I think the first thing that you said that you do every day is pray for our leaders, and we as Christians have to do that. But it is frustrating to not see our view as the accepted view anymore. We do need to encourage and fund the arts that still promote Christianity and our values, and we need to still elect leaders that will promote them. But it's getting harder. You're right.
Is there anyone out there? I mean, I think about Toby Mac, how he can reach a lot of the young people with his music. I mean, our young people are being brainwashed in colleges, and that's, the statistics show that once these Christians get into college, how they are just bombarded with all the secularism, and it's just, where can we help? What can we do? I just feel like spending money to Jay Sekulow for some of his causes isn't enough.
It was interesting you mentioned college. And I don't know if people over the years have ever listened to Hank Hanegraaff, the Bible Answer Man, but he's such a good biblical scholar, and he has 10 or 12 children, I think. So he mentioned to someone I know, his daughter who was at the University of North Carolina, and she went off to college with several friends, and every one of them was convinced to be on the left. They were Christian friends of hers. To be on the left once they got there, except her. Of course, she got to go back home and talk to the Bible Answer Man, her dad, and she was able to stand up for her faith. But every one of her friends that went with her, besides her, didn't. They you go to a secular school like that, and you expect the pressure, and it's only a very few kids that have been specially trained, I think, that are going to be able to stand up against that. Kerby's been in that business for his whole career. There's Summit Ministries. There are other groups that do that. There's no guarantee, though, but there are ways to prepare your kids. Otherwise, I don't think you send your kids to those liberal bastions anymore.
Well said. And, of course, she was also asking, well, what about these actors, artists, and others? We had Kirk Cameron on this week by phone, but he's going to be in studio in a couple of weeks, and I want to ask him if he knows of artists that are maybe going to speak out, and there are certainly opportunities to do so. It can be career-ending if you're an actor or a musician and you take the side of traditional values, given the liberalism not only of Los Angeles and the music industry there, but even sometimes the music industry in Nashville. So again, you have to really be strong, have your own convictions, and it kind of goes back to what you need to have before you go off to that secular institution as well. Let's take a break, though. We got a full bank of phone calls. We'll do our best to try to give as many of you a platform on a national radio program, and we'd love to hear from you. As a caller drops off, you can give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter with me. Lots more to cover, and we will do so right after these important messages.
Columnist George Will writes frequently about how young adults can avoid winding up poor. He says, first get at least a high school diploma, then get a job, then get married, and only then have children. In a recent column, he addresses the success sequence, which he says is, quote, insurance against poverty. A report published this summer by the Institute for Family Studies and co-sponsored by the American Enterprise Institute provides fresh evidence of the wisdom of George Will's advice. The authors, IFS's Wendy Wang and Bradford Wilcox, focused their research on the oldest members of the millennial generation, young adults aged 28 to 34. Doctors Wang and Wilcox found that only 3% of those studied who followed this success sequence are poor. 86% of them have family incomes that put them in the middle class or above. It's no secret out-of-wedlock births have risen dramatically in the past 50 years. A disturbing 55% of millennial parents, when interviewed for this study, reported they weren't married when their first child was born. Society's efforts to reduce poverty rates will bear fruit only when certain basic values and social arrangements prevail. That world is gone. Baby boomers still occupied that world as we formed our families. But somehow we who followed and benefited from the success sequence failed to fully pass it along. Perhaps some of us feared we'd appear judgmental if we advised our children against cohabitation. Perhaps it seemed uncompassionate or racist to oppose welfare programs that penalize marriage. Consequently, we can no longer assume certain norms, like marriage before childbirth. Now we barely bat an eyelash when we meet a single mom who is still hoping she'll someday marry her kid's father. She will likely remain poor. But this report, the Millennial Success Sequence, tells us that 97% of leading-edge millennials who follow principles we once knew to be true are not poor. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Weekend edition, Penna Dexter with me. Let's go to Missouri. Kay, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you. I was just telling the young man that answered the phone that I've been in protest on the anti-abortion side.
Sure.
And there are rules when you go in, and the police have the rules that there is no blocking. You are not allowed to cross the street or even stand within 2 foot of that intersection. You have to stand back beyond the sidewalk area. And everybody has the right to move in there. So there are rules of what you can and cannot do in these things. And we that were there, I mean, we were called everything under the sun. I mean, I'm a woman, and they call me, you know, because I was standing there, that I was anti-feminine. I was anti-woman.
Sure.
And yet we said nothing in return. We didn't yell back. We just let it go. And we stood for what we stood for. And if you're going to we have a right to protest, but we have to have dignity for the other person. Whether you like what they stand for or not, you must show dignity. And this is the problem I see. We Americans are what is the word I should use here? They are
incivil.
Uncivil, yes. They're not civil to each other. And because I don't agree with tearing down the statues does not mean that I don't care for the black race. I've stood up when I'm so old. I was here when the last one went on, and put my job on the line because I was living in Wichita, Kansas when that all came down.
Sure.
And needed my job terribly. And the guy I worked for really did not like black people. And I served the young men that come in because I'm from California, and that's just what you do. I mean, I wasn't raised like that. And he told me to go get the man's thing off the table. And I said, no, go get it yourself. I'm not taking it. That man did nothing wrong. He's a nice young man over there. And so I just knew I was going to get fired. I did get fired, but it was a miracle he didn't fire me over that. But so your color of your skin has nothing to do with this. Either you love people or you don't, and you've been raised to give respect or you haven't. That's it.
Yeah, and you raised a very good question about the legality or illegality of protesting. I've been at a number of pro-life rallies. You've spoken at them. I've spoken at them. I've marched in them. We always obey the laws, but it's almost like Antifa doesn't have to obey the laws and can cross the street. But I thought we might for just a minute mention the third article that we've posted here by Jim Talent. He's originally, of course, the senator from Missouri and is a senior fellow at the Bipartisan Policy Center. This 3 pages is something I would want to put in the hands of any mayor, police chief, sheriff, city council person, because this is what we're going to have to do if we want to bring any kind of law and order back to America.
The peaceful protest is a protected right. It's a long tradition. But when it gets violent, what he's saying, what Jim Talent is saying here, that this should be jail time.
Yes.
That people should know and understand that they're going to be incarcerated if they get violent. And then once that happens, some of these people actually go to protests across the country. They move around so they'll have a record. And once they're put in jail in one city and they go to a protest somewhere else, it can continue to get worse for them.
There you go. Yes.
And so you get some of the worst people then off the streets, shall we say. So that's one, I think, it's a good admonition that, and, it's going to cost money for the states to be ready for these protests, but they're increasing and, they're probably going to continue to increase given the climate that we're in.
I know what he says there is the states will have to maybe spend more money because they'll have to have well-trained, equipped personnel ready, whether from the state police or National Guards. And, of course, a lot of it is not money, it's will, because he said too many mayors have been lenient for fear that they will suffer political consequences if they enforce the law against members of politically favored groups. And until we get back to the point where there's equal justice under the law, and of course, I have lots of people calling in saying there's not equal justice under the law. I get that. But what do we want to get to? We want to get to where there's equal justice under the law so that you are not incarcerated for reasons of discrimination, but also you are not escaping incarceration in jail time because you're one of those politically favored groups. And so that's something that Jim Talent has done, I think, a very good job of writing about. It's 3 pages. I would encourage you to get a copy of it. It's the third article we've posted today here on Point of View.
He made a very interesting point at the end. He said, preventing a crowd from becoming a mob is not easy, but it is simple. There are actually, time-honored ways of stopping a crowd from becoming violent. We just have to have the will to use it.
Yes, again, so those are a couple of issues we wanted to put on the table there. And so let's, if we can, come back and take a few more phone calls. We'll go to North Carolina. Jay, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, thanks for taking my call. So I wanted to offer some clarification on the Charlottesville, Virginia incident the other day, because what I see there is that there were two different sides to it. You had one side that was for preserving the Robert E. Lee statue, and then you have another side that was against, that wanted to remove the Robert E. Lee statue. But within those two sides, you really have 5 distinct groups. And I wanted to just offer some specificity on that. For instance, on the side that wanted to keep the Robert E. Lee statue, you did, of course, have the white supremacists or neo-Nazis, and they were the guys in from what I could ascertain in looking and viewing footage of that Tiki Torch March. They were the only people involved in the Tiki Torch March. Then also on that side that's for keeping the statue, you had good people who just oppose revisionist history, or the whitewashing of our history. So, President Trump referred to good people on that side, but I think he didn't really articulate it to the point where people understood that these were people, and these good people who oppose revisionist history, whitewashing of our history, they weren't really taking part in that Tiki Torch March, and they have nothing to do with the white supremacists. And the way the streets of Charlottesville are laid out, they were really off in another area away from the violent, white supremacists. So I think it was important to offer that clarification on that side of the issue in terms of the people who wanted to preserve the statue. Now, on the other side, against the statue, you have the Antifa group, or anti-fascists. They're anti-free speech. The ironic thing there is that they epitomize fascism, because they're anti-free speech. So you have that group, and they're violent, and then you have the Black Lives Matter people. So that's another distinct group, and they're really anti-law enforcement, and of course they were violent there too. And then the fifth group, the third group within on that side, were good people who are politically correct. They see the statue as offensive. Okay, but they're good people. They're entitled to their opinion. And, Heather, the girl who tragically died, in that thing, she was a part of that group. She's a good person there, but, she wants to wanted, and the good people along with her want to see that statue removed.
That's a good summary. Yeah, it's a great summary. We're coming to a break, but I really appreciate you kind of breaking it down that way. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Well, wish I had a little more time, but I think Jay kind of covered it. And it illustrates, again, some of what you could find also in this article, the second article we've posted by Austin Peterson, where he kind of breaks some of that down in terms of who is the alt-right and who is Antifa. But I think Jay did such a good job. He gets attaboy from Point of View today. But we need to take a break, and we have a full bank of phone calls. So if you can hang on, we certainly would love to hear from you as well, but we just fortunately don't have the time at the moment. So those of you that hang in there, we'll give you the first opportunity when we come back, right after these important messages.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, it is our weekend edition. Penna Dexter with me, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Going to continue our conversation about what has happened in Charlottesville and also the issue of the monuments. Let me just give you a program note that Monday, of course, is the day of the total solar eclipse. We did spend some time yesterday talking about that and pointed out that if you look at the path, in some cases it goes through major towns like Nashville or Carbondale, Illinois, or even Kansas City, Missouri, and other places. But all of you in the continental United States will be able to see some evidence of the eclipse. Now, those of you in the direct path, that's what's called the umbra, you will have 100% solar eclipse. The rest of us will be in what's called the penumbra, and we'll see a variation. But even if you're as far north as Maine, you'll still have about 50% coverage. As far away as Tucson, about 50% coverage. Here in Dallas, we'll be at about 75% coverage. And as I pointed out yesterday, and we'll get back into some of that on Monday, this, I think, is another very powerful argument for design in nature. Guillermo Gonzalez, who is the author of the book The Privileged Planet and an astronomer, said that when he was watching his first total eclipse, he began to say, you know, is this just coincidence? Because there's only one place in the solar system where we have a total solar eclipse, and that's due to the fact that the distance from Earth to the moon and from Earth to the sun is 400 times different. In other words, it's 400 times further away to the sun, and it turns out that the sun is 400 times larger than the moon, so that's why you get a total solar eclipse. He looked at other places in the solar system. The only one that even came close was the moon Prometheus, which is the moon that circles Saturn. Even that one, you don't really get a total eclipse, but you get at least a partial one, but that's it. So essentially, in our solar system, there is only one place where you have a total solar eclipse. When you have that, you can see the corona. You can do all sorts of scientific investigation. And he began to say, maybe that's just not a coincidence. Maybe that's just one of many examples of intelligent design. So we're just going to spend some time talking about that on Monday. And I know after we finish the broadcast today, Penna, we're all going to put on our solar sunglasses and get a picture so people can see all of us, and also get everybody ready for the solar eclipse on Monday.
Because they're not supposed to look at it without glasses. It can be very dangerous.
And you may make sure you got the right glasses, the ones that have the right ISO configuration that NASA tells you to have. That will be allowing you to actually look at it. And the problem, and I'm concerned about this because we've never really had a total solar eclipse like this before. A lot of people say, well, most of it's covered. Well, the reason you can't look at the sun right now is it's too bright. But when much of that brightness is taken away, you can destroy your retina. So be very careful. Make sure you have the right kind of glasses, which we do. That will allow you to look at that solar eclipse or even use that to take pictures of it. Although, again, if you take it with your iPhone, you're not going to get very much. You're really going to need something like a 100 millimeter, 200 millimeter lens to take those pictures, or else just let NASA take them and show them to your friends later on. But it's going to be quite an event, which will take place on Monday.
God's glorious design.
I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to have a little bit of fun with it after the program here today. So go to the Facebook page. You'll see the picture of everybody getting ready with our solar glasses on. Let's go back and take some phone calls. We certainly wanted to give those of you that called the first hour first priority. And Clifford, I can see you've been waiting a while, calling in from KBJS in Texas. So you have the floor. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Kerby. I appreciate that, and I want to do a shout out to you and your guest, and to you take Johnny and friends and Jay Sekulow. I listen to y'all every day.
Well, that's awful nice.
It's just awesome. It's just awesome to have good radio programs. This deal on about the Confederate monuments is very 3 to 5-sided situation. I've been listening to some of your other guests there that was talking about them and stuff like this. But here's the deal. It all goes back to how you was raised. And if we had better professors, better mentors, better coaches in our school and scholar systems, and people like y'all that would absolutely tell the truth and not teach what they absolutely believe, because you got to come from the era of 1953 on through the 70s, 60s, and 70s, the way we was raised. We had great respect for anyone. It didn't matter if you was black, white, red, yellow, green, pink. It didn't matter. You respected that person as a human being. And these monuments are a part of our history. And I would love to stand up for them, but, you know, being way out in the middle of nowhere, which I call God's country, you can't just, you know, go off up to big cities and get into rallies like this.
Yeah, but you just made your point on a national radio program, though, and next time you come to Dallas, recognize that Six Flags, I guess, is going to just be one flag now, because it just can't even put up the flag of the Republic of Texas, much less the Mexican flag or the Confederate flag, and that's kind of what we are coming to, that monuments are part of our history, like them or not, and it is part of our history. And one of our callers yesterday, Penna, even said, keep the monuments up and put up a plaque and say, we disagree with what was done by this individual or something like that. But just ripping them down, as happened in Durham, North Carolina, where if this continues on, the mayors aren't going to be ripping them down, just the anarchists are going to be ripping them down here right and left, aren't they?
Yeah, I really liked Clifford's comment because, you know, for one thing, our history, and I remember learning about the Civil War and learning that, you know, we fought a war over equality, and this was what happened in the war. These were the leaders, and this was the outcome. And then he was talking about the era of the 60 or the 53 and beyond, and you saw different, you know, continuing conflicts over the rights of African Americans, of the black community. And you saw the Watts riots, you saw other things happening. And it felt like after that, there was some progress being made then, and that identity politics was being, you know, kind of, I wouldn't say papered over, but it was becoming less of a factor. And, you know, now it's all back again. Yeah. And, you know, I guess we're going to have some studies into what's brought it back. Why is it back? Was it the presidency of Barack Obama? I think that, you know, it could have been different. I think he could have been the kind of a president that could have actually helped us make progress in that area. But instead, a lot of this was whipped up again. So, you know, it is very sad. And I think our educational system certainly is to blame. I think it has, it's taught identity politics, especially at the liberal university level, but even on down into middle schools and high schools. And so it's too bad. It could have been different.
Let's take some more phone calls. We'll go to North Carolina. Helen, WLGP. Helen, what would you like to add to our conversation?
Good afternoon, Kerby. I listen to you just about every day, and I've been thinking a lot about all these things and wondering where in the world it all came from. But you have to realize that today...
Let me put you on hold. I meant to put you on after the break. I need to put you on hold. We'll get your comments right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Jean Twenge has been researching generational differences for a quarter century, but she noticed in 2012 abrupt shifts in teen behaviors and emotional states. Up until that time, there were gentle slopes on the line graphs. Suddenly, they became steep mountains and sheer cliffs. That is the year when the proportion of Americans who owned a smartphone surpassed 50%. Her latest article in The Atlantic asked this ominous question: have smartphones destroyed a generation? The generation she is thinking about would be the trailing edge generation of the millennials, born between 1995 and 2012. She calls them iGen because the smartphone and social media have shaped their lives. Psychologically, they are more emotionally vulnerable than the leading edge millennials. She says rates of teen depression and suicide have skyrocketed since 2011. It's not an exaggeration to describe iGen as being on the brink of the worst mental health crisis in decades. Much of this deterioration can be traced to their phones. A national survey of seniors found that teens who spend more time on average on screen activities are more likely to be unhappy, and those who spend more time on average on non-screen activities are more likely to be happy. Jean Twenge says there's not a single exception. She says the advice she would give to a teenager based on the survey is put down the phone, turn off the laptop, and do anything that does not involve a screen. Of course, we don't have to look at these dismal statistics and just lament. Her article and research should be a call to action for parents and grandparents. They are the ones buying these devices, so they need to reevaluate the potential dangers to their children and grandchildren. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Sony Pictures, All Saints, the inspiring story of Pastor Michael Spurlock with John Corbett. In theaters August 25th, rated PG, allsaintsmovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is our weekend edition. Penna Dexter with us, and we have Helen on the line in North Carolina. Helen, I apologize. I almost always look at my clock and make sure that I don't introduce somebody as we're going to a break, but unfortunately, I was so engrossed in the conversation today, I made that mistake. But share with us a little bit more about what you would like to speak to on this issue of discrimination and these monuments that are being taken down.
Well, it all ties in to what I remember. Do you remember Glenn Beck when he had his program on Fox News? And anyone who watched that program for those 3 years is not surprised at what is going on now, because he predicted it all. But one thing that stuck in my memory, it's burned in there, is a video they ran of Rahm Emanuel speaking to a group of supporters before Obama was elected, and he was laying out their plans, talking about how they were going to bring the government down by getting as many people as possible on the federal dole, and also doing everything that he could to tear the government apart like that. And he did not succeed. But it goes back all the way to 1920, before I was born. I was in the school system shortly after that, but it wasn't that prominent at that time.
Sure, it was the progressive movement of Woodrow Wilson and some of that.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
And remember, Rahm Emanuel is the other one that said, never let a crisis go to waste. So this crisis can be used. Go ahead.
Yeah. But he talked about changing the government by top down, bottom up, and inside out, and that just absolutely stuck with me for some reason or another. And the Democrats are like that now, and you cannot talk to anybody, and this is not going to change easily because so many people are not educated. They don't know the Bible, and they don't know the truth of American history. And I don't know what can be done to change all that, but I think that's a big part of our problem.
Well, I certainly agree. And one of the reasons we like to teach American history around this table, Penna, as you well know, is because we recognize certainly the kids don't know it, but sometimes even the parents and grandparents only maybe learned some of it, didn't learn all of it, or have forgotten it and need to pass it on to the next generation.
I noticed certain efforts that pop up. You know, you had David Barton, who's always trying to do that. You have Hillsdale College offering their courses to people on the Constitution and the founders. And then you have all these organizations like your own, Probe Ministries, who try to teach young people and things that they miss out on in the school systems. And so there are a lot of efforts to do it. There are people around the country in pockets everywhere that see the need to do this, but it's not in our publicly funded institutions to do this anymore. And so, you know, who's going to prevail? And in a sense, it feels like right now the left is prevailing in all those institutions of America. I don't know what the outcome will be. You know, sometimes I tend to be an optimist, but in these days where so much is happening, I'm starting to be pessimistic, and I don't want to let that control me. So that's when I look to the Lord, and I encourage everyone to also do that and ask Him to show you what you can do.
That, again, is an opportunity for each one of us to be a sphere of influence in our area of opportunity. Let's take some more phone calls, and we'll go to Richland, North Carolina. Alicia, thank you for calling today.
How you doing, Kerby?
Very good.
I just want to say, as an American whose complexion happens to be black, I'm saddened by what's happening regarding the history's monuments. I think it's a horrible thing that we're doing. And yes, now that we know better, instead of trying to strip our country of its history and sanitize it of all that we've been through, why can't we build it up and add to it? Add more monuments that accurately reflect what the government or what our country stands for. The trying to strip it to make like it doesn't exist or it never existed, it's not going to work. It just won't work.
In Richmond, Virginia, the mayor had that thought, and there's an avenue called Monument Avenue there in Richmond, and his idea was to add context language in signs and explain history along the way. And up until last week, that was what the plan was. Or I don't know what day, really recently, he has decided that is just not going to work.
And that's something.
But I do think that you have a good point and a good idea, and that, you know, we should add to history and explain it and teach it better. That's the way to do it. Totalitarian nations strip their history. They let you learn only what they want you to learn about your history and about your background. And that's where we're going.
Yeah, Judge Roy Moore talked about that earlier in the week, Alicia, where he was just saying, that's what happens in communist countries. And again, we can understand why in Iraq they decided to pull down the statue of Saddam Hussein. But now we're pulling down the statues of Robert E. Lee. And whatever you think about fighting for the Confederacy, this was a man of impeccable character. I think he's the only individual to ever have gone through West Point without a demerit. Now I heard about they're trying to burn a statue of Abraham Lincoln in Chicago. What does that have to do with anything? The rate this goes, I mean, they're going to be pulling down a lot more. And it seems to me that, Alicia, you got the better idea. Instead of pulling down, let's put up. Instead of being negative, let's be positive, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's insanity. And I don't, as an American that's black, I hate saying black American because I am an American who happens to be a black. But I don't have my view isn't necessarily popular. And if I thought I could march right beside the white supremacists just to maintain the history's sake for the statues and the monuments, I would. Of course, they won't let me, but instead I just lift up the country in prayer and speak my mind like I'm doing here.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you for calling us.
Thank you. I hope you'll call again. Let's take at least one more phone call before the break, and we'll go to Missouri. Frank, thank you for joining us today. You're on our weekend edition.
Thank you. In all this controversy about the Civil War, I've never heard anybody say anything about the root cause of the Civil War, which, as I learned in fifth grade history, was states' rights and control of the local interests by local control. Seems that the slavery issue was merely a catalyst as Washington, D.C. tried to outlaw it, and had it gone on another 30 years or so, the Industrial Revolution come around, farm agricultural equipment for planting, cultivating, and harvesting would have taken over. It wouldn't have been economical to have slaves anymore, and slavery would have gone the way of the horse at that point.
Maybe, maybe not. But again, the question is, was slavery an issue? Well, it became an issue, certainly, in the Civil War. As a matter of fact, later on, this is just a little footnote that Larry Elder was pointing out the other day, there was a time in which the Confederacy thought about whether or not to actually enlist black slaves into the Army, and if they did so, knew that they wouldn't be slaves when they came back out. Of course, you had African Americans that did serve in the Union, and one of the arguments against it is, well, then we'll dismantle the institution of slavery. So obviously it didn't necessarily start that way, but it certainly became a big issue, and of course that's one of the reasons why President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation and some of those other issues. But it is an interesting kind of footnote in history. Would slavery have eventually gone the way of obsolescence? I don't know. I wish we had had a William Wilberforce in this country that could have banned the slave trade like happened in England, but we had a civil war where, was it 500,000 individuals lost their lives? And if nothing else, we need to take a break, and when we come back, we will take a few more phone calls, but I do want to focus on the commentary today by Penna Dexter. You know, one of the issues related to all of this is the issue of poverty of the inner city, and her piece is very well done, called Success Sequence, actually quoting from columnist George Will. It's similar to some of the things I've quoted in the past about the things that you can do when you're a young person that will essentially guarantee that you will not be in poverty. And again, we'll talk about some of those. Her commentary will air in about 15 minutes, as it did the last hour. And again, we have posted that particular commentary as well as all sorts of other resources on our website, pointofview.net. Don't forget that we have a piece there on Can Reject Both Extremes. That's one I think you would really benefit from, by Austin Peterson. We did mention the one by Jim Talent, End the Violence, a former member of the United States Senate, who has actually written about what we could do to prevent more violence in the streets and what police officers, sheriffs, and mayors need to do. So some of those articles are helpful to you, and they're on the website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Before we're done, though, I want to talk about how to stay out of poverty. A fascinating commentary by Penna Dexter, who's in studio with us today. We'll be back right after this.
There are those who listen to Point of View while they're driving, and some can listen at home or at work. But here's the question: where do you go where you cannot listen to Point of View? Well, if you have the app, the free Point of View radio app, the answer is just about nowhere. This is an on-the-go world, and now wherever you go, Point of View goes with you. Visit the Apple or Google Play Store and download the free Point of View app. You can listen and watch the program live or play it again later. Get Kerby's Viewpoints commentary. Click the Take Action link. Learn about important issues and make a difference in this world. You can also read articles, find a local radio station, easily contact us with your comments or questions. Don't leave home or the office or anywhere else without Point of View. Again, visit the Apple or Google Play Store today and get the app, the free Point of View radio app. Oh, and one more thing, if you like it, click that little button that says Donate Now and join the team. Point of View and the Point of View app, with you on the go.
Point of View will continue after this. listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Weekend edition, Penna Dexter here. I might just mention her commentary, which will be airing again in about 15 minutes for those of you that listen online, is on the success sequence, and it's really how to avoid poverty. So we'll get to that in just a minute, but we have a number of calls left over from our conversation today about all the different issues ranging from Charlottesville to monuments to our history. And so let's go back and take some more phone calls. We'll go to California and talk to Harmony. I would love to hear from you. I understand you're going into the 7th grade?
Yes.
Well, tell us a little bit more.
So I'm going to junior high school, and I'm sure this is going to be a subject that is going to rise in history class regarding the monument.
It will certainly surface. I have no doubt.
So. Yes.
Yes. And I believe that Robert E. Lee and others felt at that time what they were doing was for a right. Because as with so many of us, we do things and found out later it was a bad decision. I don't think taking down monuments will change anything. If we must look at it, are we being ignorant again?
So it will just make us more ignorant in a sense to take down the monuments.
Yeah. And I'm afraid that your peers in school will know less about it. Matter of fact, one of the things that Gary Bauer said the other day, and it was striking, he reminded us that he ran for the presidency in 2000. You remember that. And he would go into classrooms and he'd ask them, what do you know about George Washington? What do you know about Thomas Jefferson? And it was interesting. What do you know about Thomas Jefferson? Oh, well, he wrote the Declaration of Independence. He founded the University of Virginia, a number of things. And he was a slave owner. He says, now, if I go into a classroom and ask that, the only thing they know about Thomas Jefferson is what? That he's a slave owner. And so,
pretty sad.
It shows how one of the smartest and brightest founders, our third president, is now been put into a cubbyhole called slaveholder. And, of course, you can see how that then gets repeated because then you have Al Sharpton saying, after all, Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner. So that's reason enough to get rid of the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. And I think we will do harm to Harmony and all of the fellow students that will be educated over the next couple of years if we just keep we've been taking these heroes out of the textbooks for some time. That's called revisionist history. Now we're taking these individuals out of history because we're taking away the statues too.
Well, first of all, Harmony, thank you. I mean, that was a good point. It was a simple point being made, and it was so true that it's heartbreaking.
Yes. Harmony, thank you for being with us today. I'll let you get on. You got some background noise there, but if nothing else, we also have to remind us for just a minute about the fact that the young people in America today, they know so little about American history. And if you don't think so, just look at over the years, Tim Kimmel and some of those who've gone out there. Jimmy Kimmel's gone out there, I should say. And, of course, you had Jay
interviewing people in the street.
Jay Leno. And, of course, you look at all the surveys of history and those kinds of things. There is just a sad lack of understanding of American history. And then even more so of understanding some of the Christian roots of our history. So if we just keep taking more and more of that out, we're just going to have a very uneducated generation of young people saying, yeah, I guess that was a good idea. We don't need to worry about any of these individuals because they made a mistake in the past, and that's reason enough we don't need to study them in the future.
Well, you take one part of their life, whether they owned slaves or not, which was something that was sort of cultural then, and you discount the things that they wrote to give us a constitution in the case of Thomas Jefferson, the protection of the equality of the human being that was, carefully placed into our government and that type of thing. And you're discounting a lot. You're throwing out the baby with the bathwater in a sense.
You certainly are. So the rest of you want to talk about those monuments. So let's go to Georgia this time on the Good News Network. Tom, what would you like to add to our conversation?
Well, I've been listening to this for several days now, and I just wonder where it's going to end up because, as a Christian, you look at what the Jewish leaders did to Christ, and are we going to start saying, hey, I don't want to see any Stars of David and or things like that. There's a lot of people that don't really realize the history behind the country and what was going on when slavery was being used in this country to promote production of cotton and other commodities. But when you think about it, the kings in the African countries were selling their own people to make money. And there were other groups that were using that product to make money too. And it was being done all over the world. It was an accepted thing. And now we're looking at it in a different light. We're looking at it from one angle and one angle only. And when are we going to grow up and say, all right, now that was a bad move. Let's change and start working together to make the country better instead of turning around every time and trying to make a political issue out of something.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's one side that's bringing this about, as we well know. And if you can remove all these individuals from the textbooks and you can remove all the statues and monuments, then you can sort of rewrite history, can't you? Mm-hmm. And Woodrow Wilson, I said him in a negative light a minute ago. Let's at least give him credit for one thing that he said before he was president, and that is he said, if you don't understand your history, you don't understand who you are. And certainly you can't even begin to understand what it means to be an American if you so remove so many elements of American history. Then, in a sense, the progressives can write the history for the future. And that's, I think, another real big concern, even apart from these monuments.
You know, he talked about getting better and growing up as a culture. And I think there are times in history when you can get better. And certainly one of ours was getting rid of slavery in the country. And so instead of telling lies about it or just trying to erase the whole idea that ever happened or how it happened, you know, we're refusing to give people the facts and the truth. I think that's the thing. That's the problem with the culture now, is we're a post-truth culture in a sense. I mean, didn't Time magazine say that?
That's right.
This year even. And so when you erase your history, you do become a post-truth culture, and you don't benefit from learning from your mistakes of the past.
You know, it was interesting. A while back, I asked one of our guests about the American Holocaust. And of course, that was moving it towards the issue of abortion. But one of the callers came in and said, when you said American Holocaust, I thought you were going to talk about slavery. And I thought, isn't that interesting? At a time when we're trying to expunge all of this away, the next generation, if you were to say that slavery was the American Holocaust, they've never learned anything about it. They don't know the good or the bad or the right or the wrong. They've never given any kind of moral reflection to it. They've never really studied it. That's another issue to really address as well, because if you don't see the evil of chattel slavery in America, how quickly could you begin to not even understand how awful that was in terms of
if you don't know your history, you'll repeat your history.
Very sad. Okay, Paulette's got a very good question here. She's in Georgia, and Paulette, I think you want to ask, where are the Confederate daughters in all of this, right?
Yes, I think they would be standing up, you know, for the flag, and I don't know where they are. I mean, you don't hear anything about them.
Probably heading for the tall grass, as I sometimes say, don't you think? It's not exactly real popular right now to say that you had ancestors that fought in the Confederacy. Maybe that's what's going on.
Well, that might be true, but still in all, I mean, these monuments represent our history, as y'all been saying, and they should protect them and not destroy them. You know, it's part of our history. You know, we're not saying that it's a good part of our history, but, you know, they missed the whole point, because the war was not over slavery. It was not over slavery. People have been brainwashed, thinking and telling them, this is over slavery, and it wasn't.
Well, again, we're going to take a break, and we're going to get back to a couple of other issues that we wanted to cover today. Penna, your commentary success sequence, wanted to get into that, because we have posted that on the website. And as I've mentioned before, if you would like to receive the Viewpoints commentaries that we do throughout the week, it is very easy to do. Mine comes to you each day, Monday through Friday. Penna's comes on Saturday. And for those of you that are online, listening, or at your computer, you can hear her commentary right now on the success sequence. When we come back, I want to talk about this because it's one of those issues which is related to how we're going to address poverty and how we're going to maybe need to change some of the things that we've been doing in the past. And it's also just a great reminder to young people out there that if you want to be poor, here are some things to do. But if you want to not be poor, here are some things to avoid and some other things that you should be doing. So we're going to talk about that for just a few minutes because it's Penna Dexter's commentary, which we air right now on the network. We'll be back with Penna Dexter right after this.
Columnist George Will writes frequently about how young adults can avoid winding up poor. He says, first get at least a high school diploma, then get a job, then get married, and only then have children. In a recent column, he addresses the success sequence, which he says is, quote, insurance against poverty. A report published this summer by the Institute for Family Studies and co-sponsored by the American Enterprise Institute provides fresh evidence of the wisdom of George Will's advice. The authors, IFS's Wendy Wang and Bradford Wilcox, focused their research on the oldest members of the millennial generation, young adults aged 28 to 34. Doctors Wang and Wilcox found that only 3% of those studied who followed this success sequence are poor. 86% of them have family incomes that put them in the middle class or above. It's no secret out-of-wedlock births have risen dramatically in the past 50 years. A disturbing 55% of millennial parents, when interviewed for this study, reported they weren't married when their first child was born. Society's efforts to reduce poverty rates will bear fruit only when certain basic values and social arrangements prevail. That world is gone. Baby boomers still occupied that world as we formed our families. But somehow we who followed and benefited from the success sequence failed to fully pass it along. Perhaps some of us feared we'd appear judgmental if we advised our children against cohabitation. Perhaps it seemed uncompassionate or racist to oppose welfare programs that penalize marriage. Consequently, we can no longer assume certain norms, like marriage before childbirth. Now we barely bat an eyelash when we meet a single mom who is still hoping she'll someday marry her kid's father. She will likely remain poor. But this report, the Millennial Success Sequence, tells us that 97% of leading-edge millennials who follow principles we once knew to be true are not poor. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, let me just mention on Monday, we will be talking about a couple of issues in the news, but then I will spend a little bit of time talking about the solar eclipse. We'll do it after the fact because by that time, many of you will have seen it by the time this program airs, and you can tell us what happened in your community, and I'll give you a little bit more of some of the facts and figures on why many people think that a solar eclipse is just one more evidence for design. But Penna Dexter, of those listening to this online, have heard your commentary called The Success Sequence, and you got much of this from George Will, didn't you?
I did, and I've read some of his columns on this subject before. I've actually kind of jumped off on his columns for my commentaries before. I think this is such an important concept that he writes about, and there's a new study to sort of bolster this idea. The study is called, and it just came out, the Millennial Success Sequence, and it's something that George Will has advocated in various ways over the years, and here's the success sequence, and he calls this insurance against poverty.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually have insurance against poverty, he says. Here's the sequence. First, get at least a high school diploma, then get a job, then get married, and only then have children. This is his advice for millennials. This report that came out this summer was done by the Institute for Family Studies and also the American Enterprise Institute. The authors are Wendy Wang and Bradford Wilcox, who we've had on the program before. And they focused on the leading edge baby boomers, ages 28 to 34. They found out that only 3% of those studied who followed this sequence are poor. 97% are not poor, and 86% are actually in the middle class or above. And so really, it's pretty simple, but this sequence does not prevail today. As a matter of fact, this is something else the study found out. 55% of millennial parents, when interviewed for this study, reported that when their first child was born, they weren't married. Mm-hmm. And I think we all know that it's not really necessarily a given now that people will get married first and then have kids, but it's a recipe for poverty. And so, just get that right and you'll actually have a better life. That's really the point. And it was interesting because I was reading something that was written about what's going on in Charlottesville, and this idea that it's bad to be white, and if you're white, you're racist. If you and yet our young people are especially sensitive to that. And so this piece, it was by somebody at the Federalist. Oh, he was a Lutheran pastor, and he said, our white sons need to hear that the way they can find self-worth, not by going out and joining a white supremacist group, but by, and because we're in this PC culture, but by actually doing exactly what George Will said. Stop living for yourself, because a lot of these young men are actually kind of growing up late and living for themselves. He says, stop living for yourself, get a job, find a wife, and have some children. Likewise, he says, our church members need to hear that our response to anti-white identity politics is not to embrace white identity politics, but to find our identity in Christ rather than race. The Christian consensus doesn't necessarily prevail in the culture, but anyone who follows that type of a prescription, that traditional moral, really God's plan of the way we ought to do things, actually does better in the culture.
Yes. One of the people I've quoted over the years is William Galston, and he used to be in the Clinton administration. My commentary in April where I said William Galston said one thing, get a job, or don't, or get married was another one. But years ago, he had actually looked at some of the numbers, and these are very similar to the George Will numbers. He said that in order to avoid being going into poverty, you need to do three things: graduate from high school, wait until age 20 to have children, and number three, wait until getting married to have children. He didn't mention the job one back then, and that one gave you a 92% chance of success. And then he found, though, that if a young person broke just one of those three rules, they had a 79% chance of being below the poverty line. So it shows how those are very important. Since then, he's added the one that George Will talks about, where the other day in an op-ed, he said, you want to know the best poverty cure? Get married, because single parenthood hurts all children. Black children bear the greatest brunt, he said. And another one, of course, is education. He said among black women with a bachelor's degree or more, the ever married rate is 71%. For those without a high school diploma, it's only 56%. So, of course, race matters somewhat. But he points out that, again, a lot of it has to do with families. And, of course, that's what we've talked about here on Point of View, isn't it?
Yes, and it's not just you and what happens to your life. It's actually generational, because if you don't get married and then your kids grow up in a poor family, they don't have the education and the opportunities, and they also don't have the example, then you begin to see this cycle of intergenerational poverty. And George Will goes back to Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a social scientist, but then he became a U.S. senator. And, he was a Democrat, but he talked about this common sense sort of sequence, and it works. It's always going to work. It works now, and it's always going to work. And so, that's something else that's sometimes not politically correct to talk about. And I mentioned in my commentary, I think some of us have been too silent. We've done this. Maybe in our lives, we actually followed this sequence. But our kids, in many cases, so many of my friends' children are not following it. They're cohabiting and having children before marriage, and then only later maybe getting married. And I think some of us are afraid to talk about it to our kids, and we shouldn't be.
Well, again, a lot of what you're talking about here is the responsibility of parents and the church. Some people might say, well, is there anything government can do? And my commentary next week is one where I quote from Peter Cove, his new book, which is entitled Poor No More. You might say, well, who is he? Well, he's the founder of America Works, and he has actually been able to create 1 million jobs for people that have been on welfare. And he's concluded that really the government programs we have really not helping individuals because they stress education and training. As important as all that is, the biggest issue is work. Because he's said before, if you actually have the right ability to get up in the morning, to get to work, to get there on time, and to stay there until quitting time, we'll train you on the rest. And so he has concluded that what he needs to do and what he's been doing is actually have trainers that work with them on the basics, maintaining a business-like, professional kind of appearance, speaking properly, preparing a resume, and showing up on time. And you have nothing better to make you effective in work than to have the right work habits. And we have a whole generation sometimes that don't have the right work habits.
Well, we do. And I think, this is a whole other discussion we could have about minimum wage laws that eliminate some of the entry-level jobs that maybe don't pay that much, but they teach those skills of, how you actually handle having a job. And that's a very important skill to learn. And as you said, you can learn the content of your particular job, and that's going to change over time anyway. But the skill of working and just the way you conduct yourselves and how you deal with your employer, those are universal concepts that don't change.
Again, remember back in 1996 when they had work as part of the Welfare Reform Act, and of course we've gotten away from that. So there are some things for families to do, there are things for churches to do, and I think there's a few things for government to do as well. Penna Dexter's commentary, success sequence, fascinating. Get a high school diploma, then get a job, then get married, and only then have children. And if you want to have a tremendous success, then that's the way to go. And if you want insurance against poverty, that is it. So again, we've posted it on the website. And if you haven't signed up, that's a way that you can receive it because it will be sent out tomorrow on Saturday. Well, that's all we have for today. We're going to be looking at, and you have to make sure you have the right glasses, the solar eclipse on Monday, and then we'll be talking about it here on Point of View.
I think we're going to get our picture taken in our glasses in just a minute.
Matter of fact, we're going to all get our glasses in, so you'll be looking at Facebook in a few hours. You'll see everybody with their solar glasses on. We thought it'd be kind of fun, and that might be a good time to mention that Lisa was the one that came up with it, but also want to thank Steve and Andrew for their help behind the scenes. Don't forget that as you go to the website, we've posted some really good articles today that you might want to pass on. As I mentioned, one of those by Jim Talent to your mayor, your city council, and others. So go to the website, pointofview.net. As you go there, if you can click on that button that says donate, we would greatly appreciate it. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday during the solar eclipse. We'll see you then.
Would you like to be above average or exceptional? I'll explain how you can be in a moment. What do you think about change? Some people love it, others not so much. I'm guessing you agree our culture needs change. But how will that happen? Change happens with you and your influence. If each of us does our part, God can change the culture through us. That's a goal at Point of View, to help you change things around you. We never charge for the information we deliver each day, but that information is not free. There is a significant cost in getting it to you. You know who helps us do that? About 1 out of every 800 listeners to Point of View. So you can be above average. You can be exceptional by visiting pointofview.net and clicking the banner Change Happens with You, or by calling 1-800-347-5151. Thank you for being exceptional by supporting Point of View. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.